Hey guys, and welcome back to Hollywood Fails History. This week we're going to cover the Tudors. Due to the scope of the show, which covers anywhere between 1518 and 1547, it has to be broken into several parts. So with that in mind, let's get going. The show opens up in Aragon, Italy, where we are briefly introduced to a man with a British accent who is very quickly killed by some French guys. We learn in the next scene from Mr. Pace and Thomas More that the man who had been murdered is Henry's uncle. There's a problem with this. At the time, Henry only had one living uncle who was very much still alive and living in France. He was in charge of Calais. This position would later bite him in the ass about 20 years later when he was accused of treason and held in the Tower for 2 years. His other 4 uncles, he had 5 of them. 3 of them were murdered by supposedly Richard III, and the last one died in 1501. The next character we are introduced to is the Duke of Buckingham, also known as Edward Stafford in real life. He is a close cousin of Henry, therefore he had a very good claim to the throne if Henry had died without children. Now, this may have been a driving force for the real treason he was accused of in 1521, but it isn't entirely clear in the series. Now, there is a scandal with a woman of his family during his lifetime, but it wasn't in 1518, nor was it with Charles Brandon. In fact, it was with his sister Anne and Henry himself. Oops. Oops big time. However, this is the early English Renaissance, long before women's suffrage, so it's very much a bros before hoes society, so he would soon be back in the king's good graces. Never a member of the inner circle, he was insanely jealous of the new men, this was a real term, such as Charles Brandon and the rest of the medieval rat pack that hung out around Henry VIII. On a side note, the guy who plays the Duke of Buckingham in the show, in fact looks more like Henry VIII did than Jonathan Rhys-Meyers in height, stature, and hair color. The only thing Jonathan Rhys-Meyers has is the eyes. Henry VIII was known to be a redhead or fair-haired and very light blue eyes, something that most monarchs shared at the time. Next we're introduced to Thomas Tallis. He is in fact a real character. He was known to be one of the greatest song composers and writers of English history. Unfortunately, he wasn't a high-ranking member of Henry's court until towards the end. He would continue to have favor under all 3 of Henry's children. Unfortunately, it is inaccurate for the show. Here's where the timeline gets really screwy. Wolsey begins talking Henry up into what he calls the Treaty of Universal and Perpetual Peace. This was a real treaty, however it was called the Treaty of London. He did have ambitions to get all of Europe in on this so they could all work together and try and maintain long-term peace, which, to Wolsey's credit, was an amazing idea for that time period, because there was a war like every 10 minutes. The reason the timeline gets screwy is this happens long before we're ever introduced to Henry's sister, Margaret, that I'll get into more later, and when she marries the King of Portugal, which I will get into later. After the treaty, we get some quality time with Queen Catherine of Aragon, who has a very sweet but kind of awkward conversation with Lady Blunt, who was one of his first known mistresses. She tells Lady Blunt how she did have a son quite some time ago, and he only lived for 4 short weeks. I'm nitpicking here, but the son she's talking about actually lived for 52 days. The couple would have 6 pregnancies throughout their marriage before she would go into menopause, because she is much older than Henry. They would have 3 daughters and 3 sons. The only one of these to live would be Mary I. The next episode we're going to cover is simply Henry. This episode opens up with the English arriving in France in Val d'Or, or the Field of Cloth of Gold. Henry rides out to meet Francis I in front of the Palace of Illusions, a 2-story palace made of canvas. It was an impressive sight to be seen. Once everyone is inside and settled, they begin the proceedings by announcing their titles to one another, where Henry interrupts the herald and says, "While I am here, I shall simply be known as Henry." Haha, name of the episode, King of England. Because during this time period, the kings of England also claimed to be the kings of France. This has to do with way back when Isabella of France and Edward II had the world's nastiest divorce ending in murder. The summit takes place 2 years earlier than it actually does. Mary and the Dauphin Francis are both present at the summit in the show, but are not in real life. There was a real wrestling match between Henry and Francis, which Francis did win. This may have to do with the fact that Francis was a bit wiry. He was a lot skinnier than Henry. Henry was not large at this time, but he was a very robust and athletic guy. It is also during this time period that Henry is introduced to the Boleyn sisters, where he begins a 5-year affair with Mary Boleyn. Not a short fling like it's portrayed in the show. In fact, this affair lasted so long that it is believed that both of her older children are Henry's. In fact, many contemporaries of the time made mention that her son looked very much like Henry himself. It's in this episode that the Duke of Buckingham finally acts on his aggressions towards Henry VIII, in an infamous scene where he shouts, "Those who are born to it!" where he refers to the fact that the Tudor dynasty is descended from an illegitimate line of John of Gaunt, a son of Edward III. Yes, I know I've mentioned him a lot. He will continue to pop up in English history, no matter how long he's been dead. In this episode, Lady Blunt also gives birth to her son, Henry Fitzroy. They have it set in the new year, December, January. Unfortunately, he was actually born in June. Nitpicking, I know, but it's what I do. There is no word as to if Henry actually had a gigantic party with fireworks after his illegitimate son was born, but I'm sure if he did and Catherine walked in and made an appearance, I'm sure she would have been as classy in real life as she was in the show. The Duke of Buckingham gets arrested soon after that scene, and 2 years prematurely from in real life. The show makes it seem like he was arrested, swiftly judged, and then swiftly executed. This was not the case. He actually languished in the tower for 2 years before he was executed. As to whether or not someone had to hold his arms out as he cried is not known. I don't believe that was the case. In true jerkbag fashion, Henry disinherited the Duke of Buckingham's children from his fortune, lands, and titles. That meant his eldest son was actually demoted from a duke to a baron. That's like the bottom rung of the aristocracy. That is a slap in the face. During the show, both episodes, they mention that the Pope is slowly dying, and they both mention Pope Alexander. Now, this is incorrect because the last Pope Alexander was Pope Alexander VI, who had died in 1503 during Henry's father's reign. And by died, I mean poisoned 3 times, along with his son Cesare. Yes, that Pope Alexander and Cesare. More on them in a future episode. The Pope that they should be mentioning is Leo X, who in real life was Giovanni de' Medici, from that famous banking family. Finally, towards the end of this episode, we get to see more than 2 seconds of Anne Boleyn, where I'm going to nitpick again, but this is actually a very important physical trait that the actress Natalie Dormer, who is fantastic, but does not share with the real Anne Boleyn. Even in the scene, her father says, "Your eyes are like dark hooks for the soul." Now, why would he say dark hooks when the actress obviously has very bright blue eyes? That is because the real Anne Boleyn had very dark eyes, so dark that her contemporaries called it black. This may have contributed to the fact that some of them would later accuse her of being a witch. And in a final act of nitpickery that I will do today, I'm going to talk about Catherine of Aragon. In nearly every film, miniseries, TV show, and documentary, Catherine of Aragon is always cast as an olive-skinned, dark-haired, dark-eyed character. This isn't the case. She's actually well known to have had red hair and blue eyes and very fair skin. This is a common trait that many royals at the time shared, be it Spain, England, even Scotland, Germany, some of the Italian dukedoms. They all had fair skin, majority of them red or blonde hair. Common traits amongst all because most of them were related. That's all for this week's Hollywood Fails History. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Welcome to the outro screen. Hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. I plan on doing more of the Tudor series. It's just a huge series, too much information for one episode. So hopefully I put it in small enough little niblets for you guys. So if you like this episode, check out my first episode with Braveheart. Check out the link to the sources I'll be leaving in the description below. If you guys have suggestions for future episodes, leave it in comments down below. Like, share, comment, subscribe. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.